picture this 1940s New York City.
Yeah.
The Stork Club,
Mm-hmm.
champagne's flowing, and you have Patricia Burton Lonergan,
Okay.
heir to the could only dream of. But behind all that wealth and privilege, a storm is brewing, one that would culminate
Right.
in a brutal murder
Oh.
and a trial that really gripped the nation.
A lot of people don't realize this story, though. It's often overshadowed by all the sensationalism that surrounded her husband.
Wayne Lonergan.
Wayne Lonergan, exactly.
So today we're going to do a deep dive
Yeah.
into Patricia's life. We're going to explore her upbringing, her tumultuous marriage,
Interesting.
and how the societal expectations of the era kind of converged to create this perfect storm of tragedy.
That's such a fascinating story.
Yeah, and our guide for this deep dive is episode 581 of the Morpid podcast. And we're going to unpack some of the complexities of this case.
It's a tough one.
We're really going to try to understand the woman at the heart of it all.
Yeah, that's important.
So Patricia's early life, as I mentioned, she was the sole heir to the Lion Brewing fortune. Born into a world of privilege. But was it really the fairy tale life, it seemed?
Well, not exactly. I mean, sure, there were advantages to being born into wealth.
Right.
But, Patricia's childhood wasn't exactly idyllic. Her parents, William and Lucille, had a really troubled marriage.
Okay.
And there were all sorts of rumors circulating about William's sexuality.
Really?
And it's widely believed that their union was more about maintaining social appearances than, genuine affection.
That's so interesting. And it makes you wonder how this potentially dysfunctional dynamic might have shaped Patricia's own views on relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine growing up and witnessing this charade, right? This constant need to keep up appearances, despite the underlying reality.
Oh, wow.
It's very likely that this warped Patricia's perception of what a healthy and loving relationship
should actually look like.
It's almost as if she learned to accept a certain level of, let's just say, moral ambiguity from a very young age.
Yeah.
So then when Wayne Lonergan kind of enters the picture, this charming but somewhat shady character,
a bit of a rogue,
it's possible that she just didn't see the red flags.
Yeah.
That might have been obvious to someone with a different upbringing.
That's a really insightful point, and it's important to contrast Patricia's privileged background with Wayne's own history. I mean, he came from a middle-class family in Toronto.
Okay.
He was intelligent, but restless, jumping between jobs, even dabbling in petty theft.
Sounds like he was always searching for something more.
Yeah.
Something to elevate him beyond his circumstances.
You got it.
And then 1939, he arrives in New York City.
The big city.
The land of opportunity. And quickly he finds himself entangled in this rather peculiar relationship with Patricia's father, William.
Now, this is where the story takes a really unexpected turn.
Wayne and William actually had a brief romantic relationship.
Wow.
Before Wayne shifted his attention to Patricia. And what's even more peculiar is that William seemingly approved of this transition.
It's almost as if the dysfunctional patterns of Patricia's childhood were repeating themselves.
Right.
Only this time she was at the center of it.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, did she consciously or subconsciously seek out partners who mirrored the dynamics she witnessed with her own parents?
It's a question worth pondering. I mean, it's certainly possible that she was drawn to men who possessed a certain level of, for lack of a better term, unavailability. Yeah. Whether it was emotional or otherwise.
Right.
This could have stemmed from a deep-seated fear of genuine intimacy.
Right.
Or even a subconscious desire to replicate those familiar patterns from her childhood.
And let's not forget the societal context of the time.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, in the 1940s, there was immense pressure on women, especially those from wealthy families, to marry well and maintain a certain social standing.
Absolutely. Divorce was still relatively taboo back then.
Oh.
And a woman's worth was often tied to her husband's success and his social status.
Interesting.
So this pressure could have played a significant role in Patricia's decisions.
Yeah.
Particularly her decision to marry Wayne, despite all those obvious red flags.
So in 1941, Patricia and Wayne eloped to Las Vegas.
Wow.
Much to the disapproval of Patricia's mother, Lucille.
Of course.
Patricia now financially independent. After William's death, continues her lavish lifestyle, while Wayne seems content to just enjoy the ride.
But this fundamental difference in their values and aspirations would eventually lead to significant friction in their marriage. I mean, Wayne, despite his intelligence, lacked ambition.
Yeah.
And he was perfectly content to be a kept man.
Oh.
He reveled in that high life, attending those social gatherings.
Right.
Gambling away Patricia's money, just generally avoiding any real responsibility.
Patricia, on the other hand, craved something more fulfilling than just being a socialite.
Right.
She found solace in her volunteer work at hospitals.
Interesting.
Seeking a deeper sense of purpose beyond the superficiality of their world.
This stark contrast highlights a central tension in their relationship. Patricia was striving for something beyond the material.
Right.
While Wayne seemed wholly consumed by it.
Okay.
It's almost as if they were living in two separate realities.
Wow.
Their paths just slowly diverging.
And this disconnect only intensified when World War II erupted.
Oh, of course.
Wayne perhaps seeking to prove himself.
Okay.
And maybe escape the growing tension in his marriage.
Right.
Attempted to enlist multiple times, but was rejected, likely due to rumors surrounding his sexuality.
Interesting.
This rejection dealt a major blow to his ego.
Yeah.
And further strained their already fragile bond.
It's interesting to consider how this rejection might have impacted Wayne psychologically. I mean, here was a man already struggling with a sense of inadequacy, living in the shadow of his wealthy wife, and now he's deemed unfit to serve his country.
Wow.
Possibly due to societal prejudices that he had absolutely no control over.
It's a recipe for resentment and frustration.
Oh, yeah.
Emotions that were likely already simmering beneath the surface.
Exactly. And as the war raged on and the pressure on their marriage mounted, Patricia began to see Wayne for what he truly was.
Okay.
A man driven by greed, insecurity, and a desperate need for control.
This realization marked a turning point.
Definitely.
Patricia finally acknowledging the depth of their incompatibility.
Yeah.
Began discussing separation and even divorce.
Right.
But Wayne, terrified of losing his luxurious lifestyle, wasn't ready to let go.
He was trapped in this cycle of dependence and resentment. Clinging desperately to the life that Patricia provided.
Wow.
And this desperation would eventually lead him to make a series of choices that would have tragic and irreversible consequences.
So to recap, we have Patricia, a woman yearning for something more than her gilded cage. And Wayne, a man consumed by his own insecurities. And a desperate need to maintain his grip on her fortune.
Yeah.
And as their marriage crumbles under the weight of their conflicting desires and the pressures of a world at war, a storm is brewing, one that will culminate in a night of unimaginable violence.
But before we delve into the events of that fateful night, it's crucial to understand the societal context of the time, particularly the pervasive homophobia and the media's obsession with sensationalism. These factors would play a significant role in how Patricia's murder was perceived, investigated, and ultimately how justice was served. So
let's dig in.
Okay. So as we delve deeper into this story, it's important to remember that the year is 1943. World War II is raging, and societal norms, especially regarding gender roles and sexuality, are drastically different from what we know today.
That context is so crucial. Yeah, especially when we consider how the media, fueled by the public's thirst for sensationalism, would ultimately shape the narrative surrounding Patricia's murder.
The press of that era often relied on exaggerated headlines and salacious details just to sell papers.
Wow.
And unfortunately, in cases like this, the truth often became a casualty of the sensationalism.
So let's rewind back to the summer of 1943.
Okay.
Patricia and Wayne officially separate, and she starts seeing a new man, Mario Gabellini, an Italian count and interior decorator.
Interesting.
It seems she was finally breaking free from the shackles of her suffocating marriage.
And this newfound freedom, this glimpse of happiness that Patricia seemed to find with Mario, makes the events that follow all the more tragic.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, Wayne, stationed in Toronto for his Air Force training, makes a discovery that fuels his resentment. Patricia has not only cut him out of her will, but has also named their infant son, Billy, as the sole beneficiary.
Oh, my God.
His dreams of inheriting her fortune are dashed, and his anger just festers.
This development speaks volumes about Wayne's character.
Yeah.
Despite their separation, despite the fact that he had contributed very little to their marriage or to their son's upbringing, he remained fixated on her money.
It's a chilling reminder of his greed.
Yes.
And his distorted sense of entitlement.
It really is.
He felt he deserved her wealth regardless of his own action.
Exactly.
Or lack thereof.
This sense of entitlement, coupled with his mounting resentment,
right,
would ultimately set the stage for a horrific confrontation.
Now let's fast forward to October 23rd, 1943.
Okay.
Patricia, embracing her newfound freedom, spends the night out on the town with Mario and another couple dinner nightclubs. They even end up at the famous Stork Club.
Wow.
Rubbing shoulders with New York City's elite. It's a stark contrast to the life that Wayne is leading, stuck in Toronto, consumed by bitterness and resentment.
And as the night wears on, some witnesses even speculate that Patricia and Mario might have gotten engaged.
Really?
She seemed genuinely happy, radiant, even a far cry from the woman trapped in a loveless marriage.
It's heartbreaking to think about how quickly that happiness would be extinguished.
Meanwhile, Wayne is in town on a 48-hour military leave, ostensibly to visit his son, Billy. But Patricia, wanting to avoid another confrontation about the will, makes no plans to see him. She knows any interaction with him will be fraught with tension and likely end badly.
But fate, as it often does, had other plans.
On that fateful morning, after dropping Patricia off in her apartment around 6 a.m., Mario calls a few hours later to check on her. He gets no answer. Patricia's nurse, Elizabeth Black, is also unable to wake her. Hours tick by and concern turns to dread. Finally, Elizabeth manages to open Patricia's locked bedroom door. And what she discovers is a scene of unimaginable horror.
Patricia's lifeless body.
Yes.
Lies sprawled on the bed.
Nude with a gaping head wound.
Oh my God.
And unmistakable signs of strangulation. The room is a bloodbath.
Oh, wow.
A heavy brass candelabrum broken into pieces lies on the floor beside the bed.
Wow.
A silent testament to the brutal struggle that took place.
It's a chilling image. And one can only imagine the terror Patricia must have felt in her final moments.
The police are immediately called and the investigation begins.
Okay.
Robbery is quickly ruled out as nothing is missing. And there's no sign of forced entry. Suspicion naturally falls on Mario.
Right.
Patricia's last known companion, he's taken in for questioning.
Wow.
Held in the infamous Tombs prison for several days.
Wow.
While investigators try to piece together the events of that night.
But after a thorough interrogation and with no concrete evidence linking him to the crime scene, Mario is cleared as a suspect.
The focus then shifts to Wayne.
Okay.
During an interview with Patricia's mother, Lucille, detectives learn about the estranged relationship, the contentious will, and the fact that Wayne was in the city on the night of the murder.
And this is where things take a truly intriguing turn.
Yeah.
When police locate Wayne back in Toronto, he initially denies any involvement in Patricia's death.
Okay.
But there's one glaring detail that immediately catches the investigators' attention.
What's that?
He has several fresh scratches on his face.
It's a detail that doesn't escape the notice of seasoned detectives.
Right.
And when pressed about these scratches, Wayne offers a rather outlandish explanation.
Oh, really?
He claims he had a sexual encounter with an American soldier named Maurice Worcester.
What?
During which Maurice scratched his face and then inexplicably stole his military uniform.
It's a story that, even at the time, must have sounded far-fetched.
Oh, yeah.
And unsurprisingly, it quickly unravels under scrutiny.
The police investigate the apartment where Wayne claimed to have been staying and discover that no such soldier had ever been there.
In fact, the butler at the apartment confirms that Wayne was the only guest that weekend.
Right.
And that no one else, let alone an American soldier, had been present.
And just when you think it couldn't get any stranger, a man named Maurice Worcester actually comes forward.
Really?
Stating that he's never even met Wayne Lonergan.
Wow.
The web of lies begins to close in, and Wayne's alibi crumbles before their very eyes.
It's a classic case of digging yourself deeper into a hole.
Yeah.
The more Wayne tries to explain himself, the more suspicious he becomes.
Exactly. And despite the mounting evidence and his increasingly flimsy alibi, Wayne continues to deny any involvement in Patricia's death.
Wow.
However, after hours of intense interrogation, and when confronted with the fact that his bloody fingerprints were found at the crime scene, he finally cracks.
What follows is a chilling confession.
It is.
That sends shockwaves through the city.
Right.
In graphic detail, Wayne recounts how he lost control.
Wow.
During an argument with Patricia about their son and money, he describes grabbing the candelabrum, striking her repeatedly, and then in a fit of rage,
oh my God,
strangling her until she went limp.
The level of detail in his confession is truly disturbing.
Yeah.
He remembers the desperate struggle, the sound of her pleas, the way her fingernails clawed at his skin.
Oh, wow.
It's a gruesome testament to the brutality of the crime.
Right.
And the raw terror Patricia must have experienced in her final moments.
It's absolutely horrific, and the fact that he tried to cover up his actions by destroying his bloody uniform and concocting that absurd alibi only further solidifies his guilt.
Exactly.
In the eyes of the investigators.
But here's where the societal prejudices of the time come into play.
Okay.
Instead of focusing solely on the heinous crime itself, the media latches on to Wayne's sexuality.
Right.
Headlines scream about his degenerate nature.
Wow.
Painting him as a depraved monster, driven by his unnatural desires.
It's a classic example of how societal biases can warp our understanding of crime. Instead of acknowledging that murder is a crime that can be committed by anyone regardless of their sexual orientation, they chose to sensationalize Wayne's sexuality.
Exactly.
Creating a narrative that fueled public outrage and potentially influenced the jury pool.
Exactly. And this distortion of the narrative, this focus on Wayne's personal life, rather than on the brutal murder of a young woman, raises important questions about how justice was served. Did the media's obsession with Wayne's sexuality overshadow the true tragedy, the loss of Patricia's life?
It's a question that lingers even today as we revisit this case and try to understand the complexities of a time when societal norms and prejudices often intertwined with the pursuit of justice.
You know, it's unsettling how the media's portrayal of Wayne's sexuality kind of overshadowed the brutality of Patricia's murder.
Yeah, it really does.
It makes you question how society viewed women, especially those of wealth and social standing back then. Indeed, Patricia, despite her privilege, becomes almost a footnote in her own story.
It's sad.
We hear more about Wayne's supposed degeneracy than about her aspirations, you know, her volunteer work, her love for her son. The media seemed more intent on crafting a salacious narrative than on honoring the memory of the victim.
It's a stark reminder that even in death, women, especially in those times, were often defined by the men in their lives. Their own identities relegated to the background.
This case is a microcosm of a much larger issue. The tendency to demonize marginalized groups and twist their stories to fit pre-existing narratives. It's a disturbing pattern that unfortunately echoes even in contemporary times.
It really underscores the importance of being discerning consumers of information.
Absolutely.
You know, we must question the narratives presented to us, seek out diverse perspectives, and challenge biases that perpetuate harmful stereotypes.
Right. And returning to Patricia, it's clear she was much more than just a wealthy socialite. She sought purpose beyond the confines of her privileged world. Her dedication to volunteer work demonstrates a desire to make a meaningful contribution to society.
It makes her murder all the more tragic.
It really does.
Her life was cut short, her potential unfulfilled, all because she was trapped in a toxic relationship with a man driven by greed and a desperate need for control.
And what about young Billy?
Right.
Left to grow up without either parent?
It's hard to imagine.
His life forever marked by this horrific event.
Yeah.
It's a sobering reminder that the consequences of such a crime extend far beyond the immediate players, leaving behind a legacy of pain and unanswered questions.
We can only hope that despite the trauma he endured, Billy was able to find peace and build a life filled with love and stability, far removed from the shadow of this case.
I hope so, too.
The Wayne Lonergan case serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that darkness can lurk beneath the veneer of glamour and privilege.
It's a story about the perils of unchecked ambition, the corrosive power of greed, and the enduring struggle against societal prejudices that can obstruct justice.
It challenges us to examine our own preconceptions and strive for a more equitable world where victim stories are heard. Justice is pursued without bias. And we learn from the mistakes of the past to create a better future.
Absolutely.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the tragic case of Patricia Burton Lonergan.
Thank you for joining us. We hope this exploration has prompted you to think critically about the narratives we consume and the importance of seeking truth and justice, even in the face of deeply ingrained societal biases.